Welcome to the Home Business Podcast with Richard Captain Henderson, publisher of Home Business Magazine, and Sherilyn Colleen, managing editor. This how-to show helps you successfully operate your home-based business.
Greetings and welcome to the Home Business Podcast. I'm Richard Captain Henderson, your skipper at Home Business TV.
Hey, I'm Lynn, your co-host.
Let's gear for seeing getting away. Most all areas of our business world have been turned upside down with the coronavirus.
Working virtually is not easy, and neither is negotiating. Entrepreneurs must rapidly develop new negotiation skills for a virtual world.
If entrepreneurs are not equipped to negotiate in a virtual world, the impact of the bottom line will reach far beyond today's financial crisis.
So how can your business equip itself better to negotiate virtually and minimize the financial impacts of COVID-19?
Today's podcast guest, Brian Buck, CEO of Scottworth North America, has some answers on how you can better negotiate when you cannot meet face-to-face.
So hello, Brian Buck. Welcome to the Home Business Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Good at connecting virtually with someone else in their home office too in this time of lockdown.
Yes, it seems to be this is the mode for all of us at this point. Everybody's from home, from remote spaces. It's really been interesting to get to know people in this more personal sense in some ways.
Sure. Where are you connecting in from today?
Southern California.
Oh, what part?
I'm in Thousand Oaks, California.
Okay, used to live down in Orange County. So
very good.
Good place in the world to be. An entrepreneur working from home.
Yeah, absolutely. Aren't we all?
So thanks for connecting in.
So Brian, what is so stressful and challenging in negotiations that create problems in a virtual environment?
Well, it's interesting. None of the stress of an actual negotiation goes away when you're virtual. So if you think about all the stress that already exists of, boy, I got to get this deal done, or the personal impacts it might have, or the impacts on your business and the like, those are all still there. Now it gets amplified virtually for all kinds of reasons. The first one being, the entire world went virtual almost overnight, and everybody's still trying to figure this out. So there's already that stress of, boy, how do I engage with people? Am I on video? Am I not on video? Are they understanding what I'm saying? I can't maybe read the same things that I used to read before. So that amplifies it. Add to that all the emotion that's now behind what's just going on as everybody's trying to figure out, how do I save my business? How do I move my business forward? So there's all of that as well. So I would say the uncertainty of what we're dealing with and how to deal with it, along with the emotion of the current state of affairs. And all of that is just making negotiating virtually far more stressful than maybe what a normal negotiation might be like.
I kind of like what you said initially, this feedback loop you need, and you just take it for granted meeting face-to-face. But when you're virtual, it opens up a whole new challenge where you're not getting that feedback loop. You're not getting that direct interpersonal. And so there's a human factor, a human aspect to this, to adapting to virtual negotiations.
Absolutely. Well, think about it. If we're able to meet in person, there's the whole physical element, sharing the same space together, even though we can see each other right now and we're making the most out of this virtual space. You're not here in my room with me and I'm not there in your room. So just picking up on simple body language or how somebody's demeanor is. Are they fidgety? Are they calm? Those sorts of things. And let alone just being able to old-fashioned shake on a deal and things of that nature, or laugh together or enjoy the space together and have that shared experience. All of those factors are now removed in this virtual space, and it's just a different engagement. So we can't read people the same way that we used to be able to. So we have to adjust, and we have to interpret what we're experiencing in a way that's foreign to most of us. We haven't been doing this very regularly.
I have, but yeah, I know what you mean.
So we all have to evolve and adapt. Yeah, exactly. Well, then you have the advantage. I mean, I think for people that have been doing this, what it's like when you're doing this remotely. You specifically, Captain, have developed a comfort level with it. The rest of us, this is a whole new ball game. So we're all trying to adapt and going, wow, did they frown at me, or did they frown at something that just came across their screen, or somebody that walked in the room that we didn't see? Are they smiling at me, or are they smiling at something, a text or a tweet that they just got? So, there's a lot more interpretation that needs to happen.
And one of the points you brought up about this human factor and adjusting to it and not getting the feedback and the in-room interactions, I think the best way to get through that is just practice. Do more time on Zoom negotiations, virtual negotiations, and that's really the only way you're going to get more familiar with it.
Well, I agree. And our clients, at the start of the pandemic compared to where they're at today, it's been a very fast evolution. So initially when the world went virtual, there were some who were, fine, I've already do this, I'm okay. Mm-hmm. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum, which is, wow, our entire world is very personal. We go see our customers. We talk to our suppliers. They're in our offices every day. That was a complete upturn of their entire world, but they've all been adapting. And I would say today is much better than it was 30 days ago, 60 days ago. And I got to imagine that the tectonic shifts that we've seen are going to remain in play.
Yeah, who knows how long this is going to go. Well, let's dig in a little bit to the points of the negotiation. How do you deal with conflict in a virtual negotiation, especially when most of the friction might be coming through emails?
Yeah, so negotiating over emails is very interesting. So the act of negotiating does not change no matter the modality. So if we're in person or we're doing this virtually or we're using asynchronistic tools like email or text or otherwise, the way we negotiate stays the same. However, the modalities really impact greatly what's happening in the negotiation. So let's take email. Email is asynchronistic, meaning it's one direction communication. You and I can't banter like we are now over email.
There's no feedback loop there.
That's right. And there's no back and forth or any of that. So I send something, now I got to wait for you to send something back. And so while email is instant, our reaction should not be instantaneous. So that's the first thing. And what we're seeing happen is people will get emails and maybe it hits an emotional trigger where they immediately go, oh, I'm going to fire something back, and regretfully they will fire something back. So
I think that comes through when you see words and you don't know the context. You might assume somebody's angry or being insulting, and they didn't mean it that way. So you got to look at the email from every different type of angle. And just
that's it. And I would say, and get curious, right? So if somebody sends, imagine you get an email that just says K, because I guess it takes too long to write out okay. So there's K, and you get these big caps of words like, what does this mean? So while it might be an emotional trigger to you, take a moment, breathe, and actually get curious about what's behind it. If you don't understand it, get clarity. Are you angry at me? Did you mean to send this in all caps? What does this all caps mean? Why are you making this demand? Why now? What are these things? And ask some clarifying questions to just understand the motivation of the other party, because that will give you better perspective on how you're going to respond. And so you got to be more, while email is instant, that instantaneous response may not be the best thing to do. So just take a moment to gain perspective, and I think you'll be in a much better place.
So try to keep your emails brief, but maybe be able to send more emails where you clarify, try to get that feedback loop from the person if you don't really understand the intent of what they're saying. I like that thing, like they might be capitalizing it to emphasize something, but to you, they're screaming at you. And so what does this all mean?
Yeah, my kids keep telling me stop sending text in all email or all capitalizations. Caps, yeah. It sounds like you're yelling at me. Sorry, kids, my bad. Well, and the other element that you brought up as well, which is the idea of just taking that moment to gain that feedback loop is also important as well, with regards to also being succinct. Mm-hmm. But being succinct is an interesting dynamic too. Succinct to you may not be succinct to me.
Right.
I'm somebody that likes a lot of detail. I like I am a little bit verbose in my emails, but some of the people I communicate with, they like headlines, bullet points. They want me to be short with words. So I would advise that you communicate in the modality that's most comfortable to the other person. So if they want detail, give them detail. If they want to be, they'd rather have headlines, give them headlines. And if you don't know, I default to headlines or succinctness more so than
the rule we had in the military, particularly when you were communicating by email, which was a lot of the communications, is they call it BLUF, bottom line up front. So be as verbose as you want on the bottom of the email, but assume they won't be able to read more than 3 or 4 lines of what you're saying. So state up front what you want them to do.
Yeah, and those people that that like all the detail, they'll be fine with the bullet points. Okay, got the headlines, because they'll get through that to get to the detail. Those that don't want the detail and just the headlines, they won't have patience for the detail. So they'll just read the headlines, and the rest of it is, I guess, email junk, so to speak,
right,
or just taking up space.
So reading body language can be a huge struggle, as discussed. Do you have any further points on how to read the other side when negotiating virtually?
Well, I think what you have to do is start paying attention much more closely to how they're engaging with you. So if somebody likes to put some examples at the beginning of their statements, or they want to lead into a more verbose point, then this is probably somebody that likes those sorts of details. So it's reading things of that nature. But if they're very short and to the point, they're not somebody that's going to engage in a lot of the frilly parts of our language, or that just simple banter that you normally have in front of a conversation. So you need to start reading the rhythm and tone to their conversation style and try to adapt.
How about that tone and style? Can you pick any of that up visually, not just the verbal, but the visual?
Well, I think if we're still working on in a virtual world where we're doing a video call, yeah, there's certainly those things that you can still pick up. So if they have the furrowed brow, you may want to take a moment to find out if there's anything wrong. If they're leaning back, they may be either disengaged, or they could be just contemplating what you're talking about. Everybody's body language is going to be a little bit different. Mm-hmm. You can make assumptions about what you're seeing, but my recommendation is to confirm those assumptions. So if you're picking up something and they don't seem engaged, or they seem angry, or they seem okay with what you're talking about, just check in. So, hey, did what I say make sense? How does that make you feel? It seems like you have some concerns about that. Am I reading that correctly or incorrectly? Just test the assumptions. I think skilled negotiators do a very good job of that, whether it's signals or other things. They're just always testing those assumptions, getting confirmation as they go.
Yeah, competency I'm picking up, talking to you here, is that you need to constantly be focused on reading who you're talking to, and keep challenging your assumptions and looking at ways to draw them out by just focusing on the point you're trying to negotiate, but how is it being perceived?
Absolutely. And I think that idea of testing your assumptions goes all the way throughout a negotiation. So if we think about when I go to prepare for a negotiation, whether it's live, virtual, or otherwise, I need to think about not just the issues that are important to me, but what are the issues that are important to the other side. And then when I get into the negotiation, test those assumptions, because after all, those are just assumptions, unless they've explicitly told me, hey, here's my issues. But even then, there's probably some unstated issues that I need to discover. Right. So I just get in and I start testing this, the assumptions I've made. I want them to confirm for me. I want to make sure that I understand their point of view. And it's sort of getting out of your own ego for a minute and really just focus on them. What's important to you? What do we need to accomplish for you? And when I have that understanding, now I can start to align those with what's important to me and really forward the negotiation.
Keep throwing out lines. Well, Brian, tell us a little bit more about power balance in negotiation, how you can gain power when you may feel like the underdog having to communicate virtually.
Yeah, so power is the currency of all negotiation, and it's what we leverage to drive our positions forward. So power is first derived in understanding what it is that you have, the incentives that you have to give, and also the sanctions of what you could do to the other party as well. So we think about it as incentives and sanctions. What can I do for somebody? What can I do to somebody? Most people don't like to use the sanctions because they feel that's a sort of a bad guy kind of approach. But the reality is if I can actually do something to you, that's something to take in consideration, because people are negotiating with you because they either want something from you or they want to avoid that thing that you can do to them. So having that understanding of what you're doing for them and what you could do to them is very important. And that's where your power comes from.
Maybe try to soft pedal the sanctions. And
Yeah, I
put them
think
out there,
I
don't
think
have to state them. I think you don't have to state them, explicitly, but just subtly, make sure the other party knows that you're aware of them.
you're spot on. And so let's assume for a second you have a liquidated damages clause in your agreement that you could fully exercise if you wanted to. One approach is to walk in and say, hey, unless we figure out a solution here, I'm going to exercise liquidated damages. I'm going to take you to
a threat.
Yeah, I mean, if you walk in with that demeanor, that could derail an entire conversation. It could take it from a collaborative approach to a very competitive. It's going to put them on their back heels. They'll stop sharing information. The negotiation will get much harder.
It'll break the negotiation down. That'll shut the communication off, which would
100%
worse.
Right. Yeah, 100% right. So instead, what I would do in that situation is I would walk in and say, look, I really want to come to a resolution here. We've been good partners. I know we have the liquidated damages clause. I don't want to go to that. I'd rather just come up with a solution. So let's talk about the solution that we can get to. So very subtly, you just lay in there that I'm aware of it. I want you to know that I'm aware of it. But really, my intent
it's
here
a tool in the toolbox, but I don't want to have to pull it out.
That's exactly right. But if you need to, you can. So I think it's important. Lots of people mistake their positions for their demeanor. They're afraid to bring out something like that because it'll make them look bad, or they don't want to come across as angry or mean, so they don't say anything. And it's that deference to nicety, if you will, or politeness
that get you just to stay them out of trouble.
Yeah, that you're exactly right. So I just recommend to folks, hey, you can still be nice and be firm. Don't confuse those two things.
Mm-hmm. So, Brian, the entire business world is on steroids adapting to video conferencing during COVID-19. How can entrepreneurs and small business owners specifically better negotiate via video?
Yeah, so here's what's great about entrepreneurs is the way that we look at the world is when there's a problem, we see opportunity. And I would look at negotiating virtually as the same thing. So what's the problem? The problem is I can't be in person. So the opportunity I now have is to do this virtually. So how can you use that to your advantage? One of the first things that jumps out is now that we're virtual, you have no idea if I'm communicating with others right now on this call. I could be getting suggestions from other people. Well, let's think about this if it was a negotiation. As data or information is coming up, we could be fact checking. I could be communicating incognito with my colleagues to really understand if what I'm hearing is accurate, or asking questions of, hey, what if we were to do this? You can almost start to shape and evolve your negotiation in real time just by leveraging the technology out of sight, if you will. And I think that's perfectly fine. And so the entrepreneurs need to look at this from the perspective of, wow, what's this opportunity that it presents? Maybe I can make more, my presentations can be far more dynamic because I've got the use of this technology. It can be more immediate. I don't have to worry about scheduling plane rides, hotels, things of that nature to get to a customer. I can do it now. I can start to resolve things now. So it can speed up a process if you want to. So,
that's what I saw as one of the biggest benefits of COVID-19 and virtual negotiations is that it was either by phone or by in person, your regular ongoing business. But COVID has forced everybody either to phone or video. And it seems like the video has really picked up. And you can get more negotiations in. You can interact more via video with the time limitations you are by in-person meetings. So maybe that's created some kind of an advantage you can leverage, that more and more of the business world is comfortable now negotiating and talking by video now that it's been forced on everybody.
Absolutely. And I think most entrepreneurs and those of us that have been starting businesses over the last few years, we're already adopting tools like this. But one of the issues with the adaptation of these tools is not everybody else has followed the same adoption path that we have. Well, now with COVID-19, where again, the world went to virtual overnight, now you're getting everybody in the business world more comfortable with the same tools that we've already adopted. So now we can put these tools to better use. And I agree with you. I think we can have conversations sooner. I think we can do things faster. I think we can be more efficient because now we have everybody's undivided attentions in this virtual world, and it makes that part, I think, a little bit easier for us. So while we have some other stresses going on, at least this element of speed and efficiency is a benefit.
And what do you think about the etiquette? Say, you know, you have somebody you need to negotiate with, you would maybe you were typically do it by phone. Is there anything wrong with saying, hey, can we were going to talk on the phone, but can we jump on a Zoom call? Has it gotten common enough where you can suggest a Zoom or a Skype call that it's mainstream enough?
Yeah, it's funny. My wife and I were talking last night, and she said, it's interesting. If you had asked me what Zoom was 45 days ago, I'd have no idea. But now the whole world knows what it is. It's become the new verb, if you will. Hey, let's Zoom.
That's right. Let's Zoom.
Yeah. And I think it's absolutely appropriate. And I think it's welcome. I think people are still trying to figure out some of the etiquette pieces of virtual, but it's quite all right now. When I'm connecting with people and wanting to have a conversation, I'll ask them, what's your preference? You want to hop on a Zoom call? Do you want to just jump on the phone? What do you want to do? And I give them that option. And I'm encouraged.
At least suggest it. You can suggest it now. And it's
absolutely. And then even with those that are initiating calls with me, and I get a WebEx or I get a GoToMeeting or I get a Zoom invite, when I get on those calls, I will ask them, I kind of follow their lead a little bit. If they're on camera, I turn on my camera. So I'm always prepared to be on camera if necessary.
Kind of match who you're negotiating. Well, this negotiation is all around contracts. How can entrepreneurs, better handle their current relationships when contracts are getting placed at risk? And, there could be some outrageous demands being made to maintain those contracts while we're in COVID-19.
Right. Well, every conflict right now is an opportunity. And again, I go back to that for entrepreneurs. Look at it as opportunity. You may get a customer that comes back to you and says, hey, I need to postpone this contract as an example, or I can't do this right now. And they're going to want you to let them out of that contract. Well, let's go back to that power balance aspects. That's something they want from you. That's an incentive. The sanction here is that you won't let them out of the contract, and they're still going to be on the hook for that obligation.
Which you don't want to do unless you have to.
Well, yes. And so, but that doesn't mean you just have to give in. So right. I would look at this as opportunity. So if I want to be flexible with my customers, so if they want out of a contract, need to postpone, I start thinking about what do I need in order to make that happen? How could they help me later on? So they need me now. I'm going to need them to continue growing my business later on. So what is it that we can do? Could I get them to commit to future business? Could I get them to extend our agreement? Could I get them to maybe just give me other legitimate referrals into other organizations? So just start thinking about how you can say yes to that demand. You don't have to just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it for free. It also doesn't mean that there's a monetary value to that ask, but just think about how can I say yes? And it could be as simple as getting more referrals to other business, or it could be future commitments as well.
Well, it kind of gets back to your theme all along here, which I'm picking up, is that constantly be asking questions, get outside of yourself and look at it from the standpoint of the person you're negotiating with. What do they want? What are other options I can do with them? Because you never want to, and when it gets down to contracts, you never want to force somebody to hold to a contract, because it's going to break down. And so how do you, that term, sometimes I hate it, win-win, but you got to find some way where both sides will win and there's a compromise.
I would agree. So first of all, on the term win-win, I'm not a big fan of it as well, because it implies that there's a 50-50,
yeah.
But there are some contracts I've agreed to where 90% of the value goes to the other side and I only get 10, but that's okay. Because to your point, and I think this is the part that everybody should really remember, is that both parties have to be willing to execute the agreement. So if that's how both parties are going to be happy to execute the agreement, then that's really what we're talking about. So who cares if I was able to muscle somebody into something they don't want if they won't actually fulfill their end of the deal. So it is about getting to something that's mutually acceptable. And that's maybe a better way of saying win-win, if you will.
Yeah, so after you get that negotiation done, both parties have to be happy with it and willing to move forward.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many negotiations we get involved with our clients who are saying, wow, we negotiated a deal, but they're not doing their part.
Right.
And when we start to deconstruct it, we find out, well, yeah, because you took that power you understood you had and you shoved it down their throat, and now they're trying to figure out a way out of it. So let's come back and reconfigure this. So it's always better to find something that's mutually acceptable versus one person won, one party lost, because those deals always break down in the end.
Brian Buck, this has been a wonderful discussion on better negotiating in a virtual COVID-19 world. Do you have any final tips or pieces of advice to share?
All I would say is I know that right now there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of stress. We're all trying to figure out how to save our businesses, grow our businesses. What I would tell you is stay calm. We all know that this will pass, but look at this as opportunity, and how can you utilize this to make your business better going forward and strengthen relationships with your customers and vendors, and maybe go back and reevaluate some of the contracts that you're in right now. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to be had if we all just stay calm and move forward together.
Stay calm, find some opportunity, and better negotiate. Well, Brian Buck, thank you for being such a great guest on the Home Business Podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
To learn more about Brian Buck and the ScottWork Virtual Advanced Negotiations Development Program, visit scottworkusa.com or our podcast website for more information on guests.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Home Business Podcast. Share your feedback with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our website, homebusinessmag.com.
Visit the website for information on advertising, subscribe to our newsletter. Please visit our sponsors. For more information, visit homebusinessmag.com or the expo at homebusinessexpo.com.
I'm Richard Captain Henderson saying anchors away.
We'll talk with you soon. Until then,
make it a great home-based biz day.